Joining me now, our friend, Democratic Congresswoman from California, Sydney Kamlager-Dove. She is a member of the House Judiciary and Foreign Affairs Committees. It's good to see you. The word sloppily, I think, let's build on that, because mass layoffs are expanding across government agencies after that federal judge ruled this week. It's not up to him to temporarily block the move. How are these layoffs and these broader government cuts, how are they impacting your constituents? And do you think Americans are getting what they voted for?
So always good to be with you, Alex. And I will have to say, all last term, Republicans were crying about executive overreach, and they were reminding the administration about their congressional authority. And now this term, they are silent. They are running into the shadows, and they are running away from the truth. But the truth is what the American people are demanding in my district and in districts across this country. They are Republicans, they are Democrats, they are independents. They are saying all of these sloppy, illegal, unconstitutional maneuvers are upending our economy. They are costing us more. They are not producing savings. And we do not have a king in office. We have a president.
There you go. There's the reaction. So what about the new polling from Washington Post Ipsos? And that finds 57% of Americans think Donald Trump has exceeded his authority since taking office. And you've suggested the U.S. is in a constitutional crisis. I've heard it from others, too, by the way. So with the flood of developments upending the government, where are you focusing your attention?
Well, we know that right now it's litigation instead of legislation, and we are working with the courts. There are over 75 lawsuits now in different courts demanding this administration put a pause on some of these constitutionally questionable actions. What we also know from that poll is that the American people want Donald Trump to focus on lowering the price of eggs and stopping these planes from falling out of the sky. And they also want him to follow the law. So if the courts rule that he is doing something illegal, they want him to stop. And they want him to remember that we have checks and balances in this country, which include the legislative and the executive branch. He and Elon Musk don't seem to want to abide by that.
Well, to that end, let's talk about Elon Musk, because in that Washington Post Ipsos poll, just 34% of those respondents approve the way Elon Musk is handling his job. 49% disapprove. What job, you might ask? Well, National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett referred to Elon Musk as, quote, our IT consultant during a press briefing. I mean, why the downgrade of Musk's visibly powerful role in this administration? Is he maybe concerned that Americans are turning on Musk, or maybe this is an effort at some sort of a legal cover?
Well, I think it was curious when they had that, the reporters in the White House, and it was Elon Musk towering over Donald Trump, who didn't know what to say. And Elon's child was essentially telling the president to shut up. People do not want someone who has not been vetted, who has not been hired with proper security clearance, who they did not elect to be running the show. And now here this man is doing a slash and burn with government agencies and workers across the country. Republican and Democrat workers are getting fired. And he's taking our Social Security numbers, he's taking our financial data, and he's giving himself millions of dollars in contracts. I mean, none of that squares.
Well, let me talk about something hitting a little closer to home, potentially, because Musk's Doge team is now inside FEMA, and that's preparing for deeper cuts after 200 probationary employees were fired a week ago. And Politico reports FEMA was directed to make a list of anyone who worked on climate or equity for potential firing. So let's consider LA's Palisades and Eaton fires, which erupted just last month. What kind of impact would cuts to FEMA, or complete elimination, as the president has suggested he wants, mean for people impacted by those fires?
So, Alex, first, let me tell you that I've been hearing from constituents who work for the federal government who are saying they're getting questionnaires asking them where they fall on the MAGA spectrum. And if they're not saying they're compliant and complicit with MAGA, then they're getting terminated without cause. That is a huge problem. I am outside an event right now in my district. There are over 2,000 families that are lining up to get.
Honestly, what I heard was heartbreaking. I heard from a woman who has a disabled son who's unable to work that she wouldn't even be able to afford 1 week of the medicine she needs for her special needs son without Medicaid. I heard from another person who got hurt while at work, while at the workplace, And Medicaid was the only reason he was able to get the rehabilitation he needed so that he could go back to work. And without Medicaid, he would have been stuck with that injury and would have never been able to work again. These are the kinds of programs we're hearing from people. And that's why I think it's so important that we talk about the real human impact, because I know sometimes we talk about numbers like $2.5 trillion or, programs that sounds like monopoly money and faceless bureaucrats in a big gray building in Washington, D.C., but these are real people's lives who are going to be impacted. Where I represent in San Diego, 1 in 6 people rely on Medicaid for their health care. And, one of the things I heard from folks yesterday was, while they can find substitutes for other programs, like if they need to go to a food bank or something, there is no other substitute for getting medical treatment. That if they don't have Medicaid, they just will not get the medical treatment that they need.
So there's a March 14th government funding deadline. It's coming up. There's no clear plan in sight, as usual, being left to the 11th hour. When the GOP even holds majorities in both chambers, they still can't seem to avoid the chaos. Should Americans be bracing themselves for a government shutdown?
Look, House Democrats want a bipartisan deal on this. We do not want to shut down the government. We know that that hurts so many people. And we are trying to work in good faith to get there. I think for us, one of the things that's most important is making sure that whatever agreement we get to has some sort of assurances that the executive branch will actually be implementing the funding that we vote on a bipartisan basis. And as you said, Kitty, they have the majority. They actually don't need our votes if they don't want to in the House. But, we've seen that they're unable to actually get anything done on their own. And so we're willing to work with them. But, we want to make sure that anything we do actually will get implemented and that we push back on some of these really illegal actions of Elon Musk and Doge.
So you're doing some really good work. You always have been in Congress. You're introducing bills to protect USAID, which we know has been a huge target for Trump and the Musk tech bros. But I have to ask you, Congresswoman, because I'm asked this by my followers on social, the viewers to the show, and I want to know as an American, what else are you guys doing, right? Because there's got to be pressure points on the other side. It's become a numbers game in terms of the Republicans have this number and the Democrats have this number. And I appreciate the strong words and I appreciate the introduction of bills. But when it comes down to a numbers game, what are the Democrats doing to be able to make sure that we can stop the hemorrhaging? I had a writer from Wired who came on and said the blast radius from this Musk stuff is probably a lot bigger than any of us even have a handle on.
Well, I think that's exactly right. And so, look, we are working on 4 fronts, right? We're introducing legislation. And yes, we're in the minority. Most of the time, those bills might not come up for a vote. But the thing is, we only need 2 or 3 Republicans to join us in voting to address these issues. And we've heard, for the USAID issue, for instance, every single Republican on the House Select Committee on Competition with China have signed on to a report that said fully funding USAID was important for American national security, right? So
basically saying, hey, guys, remember, we're conservatives. Do you think he's going to get his way on this, though?
Well, Allie, as you know, and as Julie knows very well, having covered Capitol Hill, Trump does tend to get his way around here. Yeah. So I wouldn't be surprised if ultimately that is what happens. But let me explain to you why this is such a big problem for Johnson. Because in the House, they are trying to pass this budget plan, and they are trying to enact some very steep spending cuts and trying to get fiscal conservatives to come along. And there was some hope that some of the Doge savings could be scored, and that could maybe not formally add to the level of cuts that they're going to write in their bill, but it could at least assuage some of these skeptical fiscal hawks, some of these hard-line conservatives, into backing a package that might be a little bit more expensive than they otherwise would have. So without those Doge savings, if those go out the door in the form of checks, that could complicate Mike Johnson's life here on Capitol Hill. But this is just another great example of how the cracks in the GOP's support of Doge are really starting to form.
Tim, I want to just stay on the idea of Doge dividends for a few more seconds if we can, because we don't have any idea if these checks would even work, how much they would even be for. Doge is completely untransparent in the work that it's actually doing. But is there any political risk to floating these kinds of checks if they aren't a sure thing?
Well, I mean, there's some political risk to Mike Johnson. You just look at those two videos there of Elon Musk with the sunglasses and the chainsaw and everybody screaming. And then you have poor schoolmarm Mike Johnson being like, remember, guys, remember our principles. We've got to pay down the debt. You can see why one is more appealing than the other politically. But the reality is that they are in a bind with regards to the budget, even without paying Doge dividends. I mean, the budget they put out with extending the Trump tax cuts and no tax on tips, even with the Doge cuts, still adds another $3.5 trillion to the debt. And Trump added more to the debt in his first term than any other president in our history. And so, Mike Johnson, I think, is going to have a tough sell talking about fiscal responsibility, given the obligations that they have and the promises Trump has made with the tax cuts, in addition to this now floated.
So, folks, we have them running and hiding. We have Trump and his allies running and hiding, and that is a good thing. They're not hiding. And look, this isn't a J6 scenario because, Democrats aren't going to hurt them or anything. They're hiding from public pressure because they're humiliated and the jig is up, right? Our side humiliates them with the reality, whereas they can only use intimidation and violence and whatnot. But they're hiding nonetheless. They're hiding because Donnie and Muskie are the worst tag team in human history, are absolutely doing everything wrong. They're going against a lot of the core Trump promises. Trump did not promise this type of slashing and hacking at the federal budget in terms of employees. He didn't promise this. He explicitly went against it. He lied, but he went against it when he tore against Project 2025, when he said that he didn't like a lot of the ideas in it and didn't endorse it. And they're doing it in such a way that not only makes them look incompetent, but draws everyone against them. It's not even effectively evil. Like, if they would have focused, say, all of the cuts on Washington and on particular blue cities, it would have been vile and disgusting, and I'd be criticizing them right alongside you, but it wouldn't have angered people. But in Georgia, in Alabama, in Mississippi, in South Dakota, in Alaska, and everywhere, all these deep red states. And it's also, guys, a real sign. What Democratic Congresspeople are saying, and they need to be doing more, but they are starting to. But what they're saying is, this is one of the real levers of power. They have the votes in Congress, Republicans. At least they'll have them on a lot of their bills. But what they don't have is the hearts and minds of you, the people.